Thank you.
Let me see that tag so I can check it out.
What are you supposed to do? You're supposed to sign in first.
You're not here, see?
Can I help?
Yeah, we're going to start now. Yeah.
Okay.
I wanted to wait till we get there.
Okay.
Hello, stranger. But you died. Nice to see you again. I came back. Standing up. Oh, yeah.
I didn't see you.
And that's the way to space station. Help yourself.
Excuse me. Oh, we're going
Rita, Tom.
How are you?
How about signing in?
Hi! How you doing? Okay, she ran them off for you. Yeah. So you have about 150. Rita, did you find yours out?
You know, I think when the program starts, I'm going to have to
Hi, how you been?
Great.
Good. So where were you? What did you make?
I'll be sitting
Let's go get her. Let's go get a twisted.
Oh, shall
Like a frozen customer drink or what?
So excited que te ficará.
That's what he told me on the phone.
I made those today, yeah.
Hello, darling. Elizabeth, how are you?
I was busy. I was busy today.
Very fortunate we have it.
So, called
You're so kind.
No, I'm in it. Yeah, good boy. This is in the meeting. Don't look at me like
He is great. He's at the Mayo Clinic. You know that? That's Nick Marinus. He's wonderful. And he's, I mean, that's...
Watch yourselves.
Don't forget to have people sign in if I'm not here.
Yeah, I do. I will.
You do that? Thank you.
Hi.
Hi, guys. Hi. Great. And this is Lewis.
Yes. Hi.
I'm back in
Oh, wait a minute.
I'm glad you made it. You finally made it.
Hi, Joanne. How are you? How are you?
Oh, thank you.
I did.
How are you?
This is beautiful. We're going to need 3 because we got 261 here. Okay, all right. There's no name before we still use it. I'm not yes. Is Clara here? Welcome you. No, he's got him in his little that little thing up there. That little hi, did you get your? No, that's okay. They always make it. Did Mia get hers? She's a guest. Oh. Somebody knocked my board down.
I'm so delighted that you're thinking of it. Oh, what I heard that you
this all
You have to do that.
Is that enough?
Are we auditioning? We're going to...
Appropriate to join me in chanting the Bermejo, since it is the Holy Lenten season, and also it is the hymn that very much speaks about the purpose of this very beautiful, wonderful, and great organization of yours. Deeper bajo stratigota nikiti bria os litro isa ton vinonet Almighty and everlasting Father, giver of every good and perfect gift, to thee we bow our heads and we lift our hearts and minds. We thank you, Lord, for this immersion of love. Help us so that everything that we'll accomplish today will be for your glory, for the benefit of this outstanding organization, and for the good of our beloved Oregania. In the name of Jesus we pray, who taught us to say, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. I would like to welcome you all. I would like to express to each and every one of you my personal gratitude, my humble congratulations for the wonderful job that you have been doing. And I was saying to Mr. Vasilakis tonight, with my humble vision, I can see that this organization has a great future. You are going to reach new horizons of cultural, spiritual, social, and religious horizons. Keep up the good work. In any way that I can help you, please give me the opportunity. I'm looking forward to work with you, especially in the near future when, God willing, I retire. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Here this evening, old friends, and we're looking forward to the talk this evening. I do want to welcome Mr. KARBERG, who is the professor of art from Cuyahoga Community College. He will speak to us about the cultural gardens. We will have a brief business meeting, and at this time I would like to call upon Andrew Chikalos, our Vice President, who will conduct this brief meeting. Thank you.
Everyone here this evening. This is to be our spring meeting. I don't know where the temperatures are, but hope that we warm up a little bit. The agenda sheets, perhaps you have received them. I will follow the sequence of the sheet that was provided. I have been requested by Joanne Goomis to start the agenda by mentioning that if you'd be so kind to turn in your badges at the conclusion of the meeting, it would be greatly appreciated. Is that correct, Joanne? Okay, thank you. I think it's a special mention on the job that she and others are doing with the badges. Special thanks to those who assisted in mailing our newsletter, which I think most of you have received by now. Special thanks to the Communications Committee, who has worked very hard in getting this document into the community. I would first like to move up to item A and have B. Narrows step forward and read the minutes of the January 21st meeting. B.
This was the Advisory Council meeting of January 21st. The Advisory Council of the Hellenic Preservation Society of Northeastern Ohio held a meeting on Thursday, January 21st, at 6:30 p.m. at the Annunciation Church. Themistocles Rhodus led the group in prayer, and Andrew Chikalis chaired the meeting. The minutes of the last meeting of November 19th were approved as read. Mary Beth Leckis reported a balance of $20,272.19 in our account. The updated figures for the inaugural ball on November 7th are as follows. The ball ticket income, $14,620. Donations, $19,500. Total income, $34,120. Expenses, printing and advertising, $2,408.26. Centerpieces, $995.39. Entertainment, $2,315. Hotel and food, $9,104.23. Total expenses, $14,822.88. Net income was $19,297.12. The committee reports. Chikalis announced that he and President Helen Collis will be meeting with committee chairpersons to launch the new year and focus on the direction they will be taking for the growth of the organization. He invited everyone to sign up with chairpeople this evening to get involved. He will be selecting a nominating committee to appoint or recommend 2 members from the Advisory Council to serve on the Board of Trustees for 1993. An auditing committee will be selected with Emily Nicholas serving as chairperson. In the absence of Chairperson Charlotte LaJoe, Chikalis gave a brief report. This is the membership committee. Since the last newsletter was published, there were 34 new members joining the organization. LaJoe will give a more detailed report at the next meeting and through the newsletter. Benefits Committee. Chikalis announced that Pauline Latkovic will be the chairperson for the Benefits Committee. He congratulated all the members of the Benefits Committee and gave special thanks to Cleo Anton and Helen Collis, who co-chaired the inaugural ball, and to all who participated and helped make our first function a success. Communications Committee. Themistocles Rhodus, chairperson, reported they have 3 new members and invited others to join them to work on the newsletter. Pauline Latkovic has agreed to do public relations. The newsletter will be out on February 15th. Their next meeting will be on Friday, January 29th at Case Western Reserve. Special Projects Committee. Chikalis is in charge of the Icon Restoration Project. Their committee looks forward to 1993 when they will show results to the community of the progress being made. With the success of the inaugural ball, certain funds will be allocated to begin work on some of the icons. Documentation and recording will be taking place, and there will be a publication on the icons. The Education Committee. Ann Moore, chairperson, reported that they are working to schedule interesting programs, the result of which is the program presented this evening. Future programs being planned are Professor Christodoulidis, Greek Classical Studies at Ohio State University on March 18th, a speaker on the Cultural Gardens in May, and the Icon Restorers in September. Also in May or June, they hope to sponsor a trip to the Greek Museum in Chicago to view their exhibit, 100 Years of Orthodox Christianity in Chicago. Moore thanked Pan Theophylactus for videotaping the inaugural ball. Copies of the video will be for sale at $20 each and can be purchased by contacting Theophylactus or through the newsletter. Collis announced that the next meeting of the Advisory Council will be on March 18th at St. Dimitri's. F.D. Papadopoulos introduced vocalist Bill Mazorkis and Diane Kazanas-Mazorkis, who presented a powerful musical program based on Greek poetry and folklore. Gus Mazorkis assisted with the narratives, and the meeting was adjourned at 8:40.
Are there any revisions or corrections to the minutes that were just read? Can I hear a motion from the floor that the... Do I hear a second? Second? The minutes have been approved as read. Thank you, B. Mary Beth Lekas will not be with us this evening, but I have received the current balance from our treasury, and the sum is $18,421.37. I will move on to item C on the agenda. We, as mentioned in the minutes, Helen and I have been meeting with all of the committee chair individuals, committee chair people, and we are reserving full reports from all the committees for the meeting in May, which will be at St. Constantine's. The committee reportings will be the education, communications, membership, benefits, long-range planning, and in parentheses I put strategic plan, special projects, the icons. Do know that get word out into our membership that we will be looking for individuals who want to work on the archives and also the collections area of this organization. So 1993 looks very promising as far as getting those two areas started. At that meeting, we will also present a plaque that is now being designed and worked on by Rose Rodas for a special award certificate for those who are serving this organization in perhaps a significant way. So that will also be presented on the 6th. The note of membership, I think, should not be overlooked. And everyone's saying that, well, it's in lieu of our newsletter and so forth, but I think members are joining the organization for various reasons, and the diversity of that is very interesting, and I think we'll build upon that. I think I should mention that we now have 329 members to this very young organization. We're looking for that to continue to grow in the years to come. Item D, strategic plan. There is a great deal of effort being put forth by Chris Bucas, who is chairing that committee. If I may mention, long-range planning or strategic planning is very vital to any organization that is being organized today. And it was the decision by the board to approach a strategic plan for HPS. We have set aside special dates and times for this process to take place. This will be the map for this organization to hopefully follow in the future. So as there are transitions within leadership, the mission and the purpose of the organization will stay on track. And I wish any of those of you who would like to take part in that process, you can certainly contact Chris. Chris, would you like to stand up so they see where you are? And I also put Chris's phone number, so if you do not have time this evening,
That's not my phone number. But
that is not your phone number. Would you correct? Oh, okay. That is not
number though. It works for my brother at his house. Try to call after midnight only. If you like, if anyone's interested in this area, please, give it a try. If it doesn't work for you, don't worry about it. But my work number is 696-1076. at 696-1076. And my home number is 526-7905. We do have about 6 meetings scheduled already. We hope to conduct all of them as scheduled. If necessary, we can always, change them around. We'd like to get this project done as soon as possible because it's important and we want to get it behind us so we can move on to the next area of the planning.
What's the difference between strategic planning and long-range planning?
I suppose. I didn't say it, so I'm not going to try to defend it. But technically there would be some differences. But you have to come to the meetings to understand these things. We're not going to give away these pearls of wisdom. So if you're really interested, join the committee and participate.
If I may add, the long range from the advisory council. So do I have any takers to the task at hand? Oh, come on, be brave. Anyone? If not, if I don't get any takers from the meeting this evening, I will personally solicit from our membership listing I need 4 to 6 individuals. We have one. Anyone interested at all in assisting? It is a very, very important task to look carefully at the selection of new trustees for this organization. So it is not a task to be taken lightly. But we have specified the time and the meetings very clearly. So you have 2 meetings, and then you will dissolve the nominating committee. Any interested parties? Yes. Okay. There's one other. Anybody else? Donna, I'm sorry, Donna has raised her hand. Thank you, Donna. Okay. We'll settle for 2. I will solicit then from the membership to receive 2 additional, possibly 4, no more than 6 on the committee. Thank you, Donna. Yes.
Who was the first person?
That is Mrs. Theophylactis.
Was there one before Donna that you mentioned?
Kay Theophylactis.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Okay, just 2.
Just 2. Thank you. Item F on the agenda, Greek Independence Day, Brook Park, Ohio, a new development. The modular display that we prepared for the Icon Restoration Project, it has been requested by the mayor of Brook Park to be installed in their recreational center. It will be installed next Tuesday in the center, and it will remain on display for approximately 1 to 2 weeks. There will be a proclamation from the mayor at their council meeting saluting the Greek community and saluting the Hellenic Preservation Society for its task at hand. So we're very pleased that this gesture has come our way. I think it begins to reflect the organization's interest in communicating Hellenism in the general greater Cleveland area outside of the Greek community. So we will perhaps have a ceremony on the 30th. The details are not finalized, but we're looking for a proclamation. There'll be several individuals that will be present to receive the proclamation, and the exhibit will remain for at least 1 week, possibly 2, in Brook Park. So I'm very pleased that that is taking place. A special panel was drafted by Mark Ficaris, and we now have the graphics firm doing the proper sign for that presentation. Item G, I put down Pete Katavalis, and I've mentioned also cultural gardens. And I see that Pete has just arrived. Welcome. There was some discussion back in January. Pete and I shared several cups of coffee after the first of the year at one of our local restaurants. And the discussion was centered around the cultural gardens. And I was trying to get an idea of the history and who was involved. And there have been many, many role players with the cultural gardens. It's through Pete's work and so many others who is really providing an opportunity for our organization to take a leadership role with the cultural gardens. The Board of Trustees will be deciding on this, I think, very serious issue shortly. for our organization to be the caretakers of the Greek Cultural Gardens. Thus, the tie-in with our speaker this evening. I think before a decision is made, I think some history on the gardens should be presented to us. So our decision is based off of a historical fact that we should hear. I would like now to bring up Ann Moore, Chairperson of the Education Committee, who will introduce our speaker for this evening. And as Ann approaches the podium, once again, I want to mention the fact that all badges are to be turned in at the conclusion of the meeting. And there will be a very short session for the Board of Trustees to resolve 2 items before we leave this evening. So all trustees could meet up by the podium area after the presentation. It would be greatly appreciated. And don't forget there are refreshments. And I will now turn the microphone over to Ann.
Thank you, Andy. It is my privilege to introduce our speaker for this evening. He is Richard KARBERG, Professor of Art at Cuyahoga Community College Eastern Campus. His specialty is art history and photography. He has done exhibits of art. He has lectured on art and written on Cleveland history. He has exhibited in the Cleveland Museum of Art May show, and the museum has purchased some of his art. He serves as a trustee of the young audience who are performing artists that specialize in school visual programs. He also serves on the board of the Friends of Shaker Square. He's on the advisory committee of the White Elephant Sale of the Garden Center, and he is married, and his wife is Judith, and she is a bailiff in the Court of Common Pleas. And they have 2 children who are attending Gilmore Academy. I'd like to present Professor KARBERG.
Thank you very much for inviting me this evening. I have been really interested in the cultural gardens for some time, and so when Andy Call said, a dear-old friend asked me to come speak, I was very glad to do so. My interest comes from several different directions. I think history, I think is exceedingly important. The fact we now find in the sense of the day of really serious study of the contributions of so many ethnic groups who have made so much to transform the area into the greater Cleveland that we know of is the case. And thirdly, somewhat of a sort of nostalgic association. I have a grandmother who, coming from Austria in 1912, residing in the area right opposite the Shakespeare Garden for some years, and so having this sort of family connection to the area. And also a sense of trying to understand what Cleveland is about, because while it's a cliche, it might seem sort of cute. In a way, you can generally talk about Rockefeller Park and the Cultural Gardens as one of Cleveland's best kept secrets, which is probably an overworked title, but still I think is very much the case. Now, there are 2 different ways of looking at the development of Rockefeller Park and the Cultural Gardens. One from the point of view of history, of the development of the city, and also natural history, what has come from geology and the geography of the area. And both are very important. I will touch briefly on both of these topics in discussing the gardens and Rockefeller Park. The first slide I'm showing you, of course, is not of the gardens, but sort of sets the stage for Cleveland at the end of the 19th century when you had the development of Rockefeller Park. This is a scene taken from what was known as Hiram House, a settlement house located at 30th and Orange Avenue, very much, of course, near the Northern Ohio Food Terminal, which is areas very important in Cleveland today. But at that particular time, this area of Cleveland, I think, very much represented the sense of what ethnic neighborhoods were like in Cleveland and other cities. Cleveland grew tremendously in the 19th century, virtually doubling its population every 10 years. A very wealthy city. We all know the Rockefellers, the Hannas, and so forth. But it was, of course, very true that it was a tremendous number of ethnic groups coming from Central Europe, Eastern Europe, who worked in the steel mills, the oil refineries, the paint factories, the mills, the clothing mills, all the other kinds of jobs that we know of. And so you had this teeming, congested city. And Cleveland was no different than New York or Chicago and other cities, of having this concentration of neighborhoods near where people work. People oftentimes, as the story goes of poverty, when a nickel was a nickel, could oftentimes even afford a streetcar ride, live near their place of work. So you had these neighborhoods that evolved. And this may look very neat and tidy. In a way, it was. I mean, this is not to say that it wasn't the sense of a untidy neighborhood. But these structures were not single-family homes that we think of, but were 2 and 3 family tenements that were existed on these lots. You notice the absence of trees. So you had these kinds of areas with no gardens, no yards, in most cases, no trees, and this sort of congestion. Also, you had various problems with illnesses. Tuberculosis was a major problem in American cities at this time, as were, in this case, diphtheria, all of these other kinds of diseases, which we've fortunately been able to eradicate in our time. And also, this is a period of time when there was a sense of social consciousness among individuals at the top as to how you alleviate these kinds of problems, of having recreation, of having facilities, and clean air and parks were considered not only to be attractive, but to be helpful, to be important for individuals. There was a sense of development in London at the time of Hyde Park, Kensington Park, St. James Park, which I'm sure you know of. In New York at this time, you had the development of Central Park by Frederick Law Olmsted, which again became, the term that was used was the lungs of the city. And so there was a sense of reform as to what you could do about that particular situation. And same thing here. This is an area that was known as Dutch Hill. Many of you, of course, I hope would know of the Tremont area, West 7th and Starkweather and the streets in that area. And of course, there were these hills that went down into the area of where the mills were, where many of the people in that area worked during this period of time. You notice open sewers, again, these tenements, fortunately there were a group of trees, but this is the sort of housing that was typical throughout many of the working class districts of the city of Cleveland. And you had, as I said, the occupancy of most of these areas by a tremendous number of ethnic groups, as I mentioned. The black population of Cleveland was only emerging, would become no more than 1 or 2% at this time. It would be after World War I. You had the sense of blacks arriving from the rural South to add to this sense of new arrivals. And so what you had were groups that were arriving. And I found this slide. This is a slide, a slide taken of a photograph, not in Cleveland, by the very famous American photographer Lewis Hine, of Greek immigrants in one, we think it was one of the mill towns in either New Hampshire or Massachusetts, where we know, of course, there was considerable Greek settlements as well. But men such as this and their families, of course, would have settled in many of these kinds of neighborhoods, just as would, of course, Hungarians, Germans, Poles, Italians, etc., in the sorts of districts that we knew that evolved in Cleveland. Lewis Hine is one of the individuals nationally who documented not only ethnic communities, but especially children of ethnic communities throughout the United States. He was a social worker who was also a very, very well-known photographer. So this was sort of the stage that we had. And we also had this period of time, this tremendous contrast. This was a home on Euclid Avenue. The Everett family that had this house at 40th and Euclid, one of the mansions on Euclid Avenue as Millionaire's Row that existed during this period of time. The connection between this sort of luxury of Euclid Avenue and Dutch Hill was the fact that while you had this sense of splendor of these homes, that we know that the sense of providing the service and so forth was there by the ethnic communities. But also, one of the things that happened in Cleveland in the 19th century was the development of private charities. Became very, very strong. These various families, and they were the ones who were able to fund many of these kinds of projects, such as settlement houses in neighborhoods, all sorts of other areas, including the development of parks. Parks did not emerge in Cleveland in the 19th century because of the city having the money to do so. It's a sort of an old story. Unfortunately, some things just don't change. The city never having money to do what it wants. And so it was the sense of wealth from families such as the Everetts and the Rockefellers and others that made the city aware of these kinds of conditions by publishing reports, by continually being after the city fathers that this sort of reform had to take place. And this came to a park plan in the end of the 1890s, actually mid-1890s, for a series of parks around the city, not the metro parks. That came as an outgrowth later on, but the development of a U-shaped park around the city that would start on the west side of West Boulevard, which I think we know of the areas now, Brookside Park, Garfield Park, and so forth, and then also on the east side of what was known as Rockefeller Park. None of those parks existed. There were only two parks in Cleveland at the time. One was Public Square, the other was known as Willard Park, which is, of course, next to Cleveland's City Hall. That was it. And so something had to be done. And so what happened was, in 1896, Cleveland was 100 years old. Cleveland had hired a well-known Boston firm to do the surveying, to work for this park plan, especially for Rockefeller Park, but the city had no money. So the city tapped its most famous citizen, John D. Rockefeller, saying, wouldn't you like to give the money for the purchase of this land for this park? What happened, though, in the very conservative, typical way of the Rockefellers, was the fact the city did not gain the park, but it was given to the city for $1 a year. So that technically the city does not own that park, but is responsible for the maintenance. Today, the ownership of that is passed through the Rockefeller brothers, down through the Cleveland Foundation and other local foundations. But technically, that's what happened. All right. The other thing that happened, though, was something else. Not only the sense of the money, but you notice that we all admire the elegance of these stone homes and how they were built. There were this sense of geniuses of architects and craftsmen, of course, in a city like Cleveland at this period of time. And one of the leading architects was a man by the name of Charles Schweinfurth, who designed many of these homes, and of course stone cutters and the other craftsmen to make all this possible. And you notice this arch here, which is the porte cochere, the entranceway where people get out of the carriage going into the house. Pay very close attention to this in succeeding slides, because Charles Schweinfurth would later come along in the 1890s and design the bridges that existed in the park with this what we call a Romanesque revival style of architecture, which was very fashionable, based upon medieval Western European tradition at the time. And so there was this continuity in excellence of design and craftsmanship when this all emerged. Now, what else made this park system possible, as I said, was the rapid expansion of what was known as the East End of Cleveland. This is East 89th Street as it exists. Well, I took this photograph of a house on East 89th a couple of years ago. This is a house on East 89th, which between Chester and Huff. East 89th Street and Huff was a very elegant neighborhood in the 1890s and into early 20th century. When I teach at Tri-C, and I do a lot with local Cleveland architecture, the students are absolutely amazed when we talk about Huff or Crawford Road or Addison or all these streets as having a sense of excellence. Today, literally is considered the pits. But that wasn't the case. As a matter of fact, is stretched now in the National Register of Historic Places. But this indicates the sense this was a wealthy, prosperous area which did not move any further east because of the matter of geography. I mentioned the sense of geography as the other issue of what happens here, which I'll refer to again in a moment on another slide. But there was this tremendous press of population, not only of the working class, but also of the wealthy in the east side of the city, as well as business. This is a photograph of East 105th and Euclid. This is a bit later, this is 1920. But this shows, again, the sense of congestion, where you support not only a downtown area, but what was considered the shopping area of the east side, which, growing up in Cleveland, I vaguely remember as a child, where it still was a sort of area. So you can see there's this tremendous interest in having parks for everybody in the city, because there was not much. It was East Cleveland. Beyond all of this, the university and then East Cleveland, but beyond that, you got into very, very suburban locations. So you got to the idea of this park area, and this is a postcard view from the collection of the Cleveland Museum of Art. What happened in geography? This is where we get into our geography and geology lesson. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Shaker Lakes, which of course are a very significant feature of Shaker Heights, which were improved by the Shakers in the 19th century. Well, the Shaker Lakes, the water, of course, in the Shaker Lakes has to flow somewhere. They flow into what is known as Doan Creek. And if you travel along between either Fairhill Road or North Park, Cleveland Heights, you notice there's a very deep ravine, all right, which flows west. That is where the water comes from Shaker Lake. There's a falls that come to your road. Matter of fact, the Shakers had a grist mill there. And then it takes a turn north to the lake. So as we know, all major rivers in this part of the area of the northern Ohio flow north into the lake. And millions of years ago, in the Ice Age, the removal of the sediment and the erosion of earth in this period carved out these deep channels for all of these rivers. The biggest, of course, is the valley, the flats, for the Cuyahoga, but you have what became known as Doan Creek, and then the Chagrin River, and the Lorraine River, and the Rocky River over here. You all have these deep, deep cuts over this period of time. And so this water flows northward past University Circle, and at one time it was an open channel through University Circle, which gives you originally the spring and the water, the lagoon from the Art Museum, and even today you see it an open culvert north of the Art Museum, all the way down through Gordon Park into Lake Erie. All right. What happened, of course, was the fact you had this very rugged terrain in that area. And that's why we have a park there. You can assume with this rapid development of Cleveland, which happened in the end of the 19th century, that if it had been flat land like surrounding area, it would have been used for housing or some other purpose. It was unusable, unsaleable land. So you had the development of this curved, widening street. This slide says Wade Park, but the development of Wade Park and Rockefeller Park, Gordon Park happened at the same time, in the same sort of fashion. It's a very elegant drive that went through this area. Another postcard. This is the bridge that carries Wade Park Avenue over what was the lower boulevard, which later became Liberty Boulevard, and now, of course, is Martin Luther King Drive. It went through these various name changes. Here, this is by Charles Schweinfurth, the same elegant arch that existed, this staircase. I discovered in working down at Cleveland City Hall, the Parks Department archives, we discovered last November the plans for all of this, which have been sort of forgotten over a period of time. But there are 4 bridges that he designed and other improvements in the park. And this shows the way that this was the recreational area of the east side of the city. There was these marvelous dresses and the baby carriage, the perambulator here of this sort of view that exists in this sort of way. So what happened by 1900 was all of this became, and this is another setting of the drive. You see the waterway of this parkland for the east side of Cleveland. It became immensely popular immediately. There are accounts of thousands of people on Sundays walking through the park. And many of these individuals lived in the surrounding areas, but others would take the streetcar, you would walk through this particular area. And so it was really like the European parks, Central Park, really the lungs of the city. And the sense of having some place for recreation. So that's the first thing that happened. And slight improvements began to be made. Plantings of trees began to take place, and other sorts of developments. Here you see another view of the boulevard. You notice how open it was originally. Today, there's been this tremendous cutting that's gone on, which has been surprising to some people. But we oftentimes forget trees grow, just as they do in our yards. We have to maintain them. And what happened originally, this was also considered the site, because of the interest of a man by the name of Holden, in original site for an arboretum. Matter of fact, part of the plantings of this was originally an arboretum. And the family later, of course, wanted to develop a full-fledged arboretum. And the plans were for that to be at Lakeview Cemetery. And then finally, of course, the Holdens, if you know the marvelous Holden Arboretum in Kirtland, which stems from this sort of idea. So it wasn't only recreation, but to have this sense of significance in horticulture, in gardens, in other ways. So that was the original intent, and it was very successful. What began to happen, though, is Cleveland began to grow so rapidly, the surrounding area became a highly desirable middle-class neighborhood. This is a view of, this is East 99th Street. Again, this is a very recent photograph. And you had the development of exactly the same kinds of homes that were being built. This is early part of the 20th century in what, if you know the area along Lakeshore Boulevard, going on to East 185th Street, or Cleveland Heights, or Lakewood. It was, that, and others in the clothing business, and others. And so it became this sort of solid community that we would know of. For example, this is a photograph taken later. This is the late Julie Kravitz, and the first of what we now know really became Pick and Pay or Finest stores, and their first store in that area, or the Ratners and their the creamery before you had the development of Forest City. And so you had this sort of community that emerged. That's what we feel that after World War I, when the idea came for cultural gardens, in a way it was sort of natural that the first garden to be established was the Hebrew garden. There was the talk about the creation of Palestine, the Zionist movement that was taking place. But what was happening after World War I, there was something that was significant for every community in America, and that was during World War I, every ethnic community was really suspect as being foreign. I mean, there was this, not only the German, you could assume, my father's family, there was this German background. I mean, been in Cleveland since the 1870, and it was true of other European groups that had gone through this sense of if not overtly, individually discriminated against. Sometimes subtly done. There were obviously this sadness, and fear that was seen. And this was the era of what we call Americanization, when, of course, people very quickly adapted American ways, began to lose customs and traditions and language that they brought with them from homelands, and the idea was to be American. At the same time, what was felt that this wasn't necessarily a good idea, and especially at a time when by World War I, various ethnic communities began to become very significant, of rising professions, of recognition of the sort of talent, the intellect that indeed was present. And so this counteracted this Americanization movement and a sense of pride in what was the contributions of others than the original Presbyterian congregational settlers and from the Western Reserve who founded this area, which of course why it's called the Western Reserve was the fact it was founded as part of the state of Connecticut, as we know in history, as a New England settlement. So you had institutions that recognized the development and the real support of various ethnic communities. And there were three that were very significant. One at that time was the Cleveland Museum of Art, the second, the Cleveland Public Library, and the third, the evolution of what we now know as the Cultural Gardens Federation. One of the first major exhibits the Cleveland Museum of Art had, I believe even before the idea of a May show, was what was called a Homelands exhibit, where the handcrafts of ethnic groups was displayed, of such things as scarves, as costumes, of objects that are made of lace and so forth. The sorts of things that we recognize now as being identified with ethnic groups. There was a major exhibit that they had. The Cleveland Public Library had an even bigger role. And the Cleveland Public Library in Cleveland was the first to have major collections of books in languages other than English, and branch libraries, and would have exhibits, and had cultural programs, and there were records of jamming to various branch libraries of 800, for example, for a concert at the Broadway branch or at the Jefferson branch in the Tremont area. I mean, all this sort of work was done, and it was the libraries who also taught English as part of their job in this period of time. At the same time, preserving all this cultural heritage that was seen, and not only books but costumes and other sorts of objects. So that they were really very far-sighted. Still today, the Cleveland Public Library has a great deal of credit for all this. And thirdly was the idea of a series of gardens that would promote the heritage of various groups outdoors, through sculpture, and other sorts of ways. And all these three things happened at the same time. In part because Cleveland was so significant and nationally even because of not necessarily the largest city. It was fifth city in the sixth and then the fifth city in the country we know, but of having so many different ethnic groups here, as was the case. So anyway, you had the development of this Hebrew garden that was established, and this is a photograph of the groundbreaking that was seen with Rabbi Silver, Leo Weidenthal, these leading figures. And the development of the Hebrew garden set a plan for what would happen later on. This is an earlier photograph of the garden itself, with a central pool in the center, and this fountain, based of course upon that idea of the Star of David, with various plaques around the side, bronze plaques on stone, olive trees that were brought from Palestine. So this was a sort of planning that went on in this particular area. And the other gardens followed sort of similarly, with ponds, usually in a rectangular format, The Greek garden, of course, has the same sort of pool. It's a long rectangle, as you very well know. The Polish has a circular area, but that was one of the features. And then other ways that would be representative of the culture. The planning for these gardens was done by, we gather in most cases, through the city. The city of Cleveland had this absolutely brilliant staff of landscape architects at this time. And Donald Gray, who was the Gray Gardens and others, was one of these individuals. A.E. Taylor. I mean, there were these individuals who took ideas from various culture groups and modified them into this American setting, but still to be identifiable with the culture. So that was where the idea came from. And we think it was sort of logical instead of being literally in this neighborhood as to why it was present. It was followed by the Hungarian garden next door. With the Hungarian garden, there was a couple other things that happened that was sort of significant of recognizing that one of the problems in putting these gardens together was the difference of elevation. Generally said it's ravine, the lower boulevard, and the upper boulevard, of working on both levels. And this was a real concern. Also, what happened was the fact that it still partially exists. At the back of the Hungarian garden was developed an amphitheater where plays were given in the 1920s. So this sort of seating. Probably the example was later used if you know Cleveland. Kane Park. Cleveland has Kane Park that emerged at the end of this time, or other sorts of outdoor parks where plays were given. It's now in ruins. It never was really fully developed. But that's what happened. But then these other gardens existed from the 1920s. Of course, we have the Hungarian garden. And here's another view of it taken in the 1930s. We have these various terraces that existed. Again, features of the community of ironwork. Oftentimes, a lot of ironwork was done by a very significant Cleveland firm by the name of Rose Ironwork, which, of course, is still very much business. Next to that, of course, was the German garden. Notice the same sort of idea, a major figure of Goethe and Schiller here, Iron Gateway, a plaza, a small pond in the foreground, and an attempt to have plantings that would be representative of the community. And so it went on with the Czech garden, and finally by the 1930s, early 30s, there was another very significant development at the time of coming of the Greek garden and the Italian garden, and the Lithuanian, and the other gardens going towards St. Clair. This earlier group was closer to Superior. And that was the entrance of the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, and of course the administration of Franklin Roosevelt. When there was a great deal of necessity, of course, we know in the 1930s providing for work, for relief, and these sorts of public projects were very much present. But at the same time, there was this renewed interest in ethnic groups again, and a lot of research was done. And and what was done, for example, in the 1930s was various sorts of documentation of artists of the city, but also there was published in Cleveland was known as the WPA Guide to Cleveland, which never was, was assembled but never published because the war came just when it was finished, which again goes through a history of these various ethnic communities. Brief, but it's all there. And also, again, this sort of interest in gardens. And so you had various sorts of gardens that emerged. This, as I said, is the Lithuanian garden, which solved this site problem. Here you have the upper boulevard, you have this grand staircase here, based upon the architecture, we think of Saarinen, of the sort of tradition of the time. So you have that emerged. This is from the lower boulevard, looking upwards at the upper part of the Lithuanian garden. What I think is very significant about all this today is that since we've had this dramatic interest in Central and Eastern Europe, again, not only since tragically in the last few years, but ever since they're coming down the wall, East Germany and some of these, these gardens which we never thought of in the sense of the countries as being independent again. Suddenly it's there again. But Estonia, Lithuania, there's a Rusin garden. Rusin is not Russia, but it actually was a part later became known as Czechoslovakia. There's no Czechoslovakia anymore either. So I mean, you have all of those kinds of developments. And then, of course, we get to the Greek garden and the sense of what was to be planned. I don't have the photographs of the groundbreaking, these other sorts of things. For me, this is the research which still needs to be done, and I assume somewhere in an archives either of your organization or the archives, which is the Ethnic Archives of the Western Historical Society. My friend John Grabowski has been very diligently collecting records of numerous ethnic organizations. And somewhere this must exist. What we know is the fact that planning was done to represent classical Greece. I mean, this was the kind of image that people had at the time, not of the history of Greek culture and the Orthodox Church, but going back to the identifiable root of Western culture, and based upon what would find in any examples of Greek architecture. I could use a slide that I take of Olympia or the Acropolis, but you all know the sense of use of designs and patterns that indeed would have been seen. Again, the idea of a sunken garden, which is unique about this particular garden, the sense of proportions that, again, would be identifiable with the culture, and a sense of a focal point that you have back here. Because one of the things that we need to mention here, of course, is the fact that these gardens, of course, were designed to be used. And ever since the beginning of the gardens, there was this constant sense of not only people visiting the garden, but organized events which would be held in them, to celebrate, Independence Days, or oftentimes, name saints days, usually in the summer, of course. That you would need sort of a background that indeed would be the case. One of the most unusual photographs I found was this one of a very early aerial view. And here, of course, you see the Lithuanian garden, and of course, the Greek garden here, as you all know, and of course the homes on the upper boulevard that is present in the way of the landscaping. Again, as I said, this represents a time, of course, when this very labor-intensive sort of business was taken care of in this sort of way. And you see, of course, originally the idea of how the lower boulevard and upper boulevard were handled was through this very graceful, long staircases, obliterated on this side. Couldn't at all be Greek without being symmetrical. So you get this very, very strict sense of symmetry and balance, and all these ideas we know of in Greek architecture. And then here you see the building of the Ukrainian garden. What happened was it was a WPA that was really sort of the genius of all this, was the fact that the standards that were seen in these later gardens was exceedingly high because of the availability of the workmen, and also the materials, also the design and assemblage. Because there obviously is no geographic or historical or any other sort of reason as to why all of this was done in this sort of way. This, of course, is the Italian garden, which also was very successful at having this dual level area, the upper level and the lower level, as you see it here. And I said there are others. This is again going back to the Czech garden. this court of honor concept. And this is from the Slovak garden, which wasn't as successful as the lower boulevard and has suffered a great deal. There's a long staircase that's fallen off the side of the hill that was a way of going down to this garden, this north of the Italian garden. And also it has this plaza, the flagpole. Again, it was used for various sorts of features. And also you would have the Polish garden at the end, St. Clair, which is small, and I think because it was small, it's also held up very well. It's also a very nice, successful design. And this is the Irish garden, done, of course, in this form of the Celtic cross in grass, as you see at the superior end. There were other gardens planned that were not actually ever built, and some half-built, during this period. And that's, the war came along, funds, and so forth. And of course, we know that recently there is the Chinese garden, and there are others that are planned. The other thing I want to mention this evening, though, is the fact that the park was designed to be used. Cliche was for people. This is a view of the skating area in sometime in the 1920s. You sort of locate where you are. This is, if you remember Notre Dame Academy, it was up over here, the Superior, and then there's a streetcar in the background. It's much like Central Park in New York, or the Riverside Drive in New York City, in Manhattan, or in Chicago. There are parks in North Michigan Avenue that were the same sort of setting, because it was, as I said, indeed to be used by the people. And we've seen it other ways. This was an evening ice skating event from the 1920s. I discovered last fall an album from the 1920s down at the Properties Department. And you can imagine what was done, sort of torches of having this sort of event that existed. This was in the lagoon in front of the Art Museum. But these sort of events were seen elsewhere in the whole park area. And it was an area for the community. Or here, swimming and other kinds of events. This is still building still here, the Hotel Sovereign. And also, you used to be able to rent boats here and actually paddle along the creek all the way down to Gordon Park in the lake. It was sort of like a Venetian canal or something. It had that sort of setting. But it attracted these thousands of people in this sort of way. Or sometimes it's sort of silly. This is a promotional view from the 1920s. They have dances and other sorts of events. You notice here, which again was done in sorts of festivities that were handled in the 20s. You always usually had a background that was classical in origin, whether it was Greek or not. There's no identification as to exactly what's going on here. But there were pageants and festivals. They were held every summer. And every ethnic group would participate, sometimes very elaborately, in this sort of setting that would go on, and even into the early 1930s. Some of the most elaborate were accompanied by fireworks. And this, again, is the park. This is 1927. Or this is a whole series of a children's pageant down at the lagoon in Rockefeller Park, with these giant screen, all these lights behind it. I was surprised no one had got electrocuted the way they would wire in those days. But there's a whole series of photographs. This, of course, the American Indian Wigwam. There's another with building the Taj Mahal, of a sense of celebration of different cultures. As I said, this was a very, very strong kind of idea in Cleveland at this time. And so that we are not only says of being American, but also we came Americans with these different backgrounds. So that was the kind of idea that all of this represented. And here you see the same sort of idea. Here's the Taj Mahal as seen in Rockefeller Park, mock elephants, and so forth. That was a way that it was used. Now, The other thing I want to mention is the fact of the sense of neighborhood and the relationship. This is Miles Standish School, which still stands, still in use, was one of the key Cleveland public schools at the time, elementary school. Beautiful building, and it shows the sort of importance this area had at the time of the 1920s and 1930s that you would know of. So in other words, there were institutions in the area as well. And then always, I said, it was a matter of the homes. This again is East Boulevard, and you notice, so there are no driveways. And you have these very large homes that one right after another. They're very much like Lake or Edgewater in same period of time, same kinds of homes. And so this is a sort of setting for what took place. And here again. And these are the alleys or the mews that, of course, are still very much in use today, after it. This is Amethyst Stone Home, also on the area, which is a retirement home affiliated with McGregor Home in East Cleveland. Also, other gardens emerged. There was an American Legion garden that was built at the Superior End, again, in the sense of an American interest that was seen. This was one of the latter examples. This was a monument to the Dorchester, these four clergy of the Dorchester. The Dorchester was a troop ship that was torpedoed in the North Atlantic very early in the Second World War. And the story is these four chaplains gave up their life vests in that tragedy. What I think, though, is important in the case is the fact that we have this unique sense of Cleveland, which has gone through a real struggle as was the case of Cleveland, which of course is typical of other cities. In the 1960s, especially the 1970s, there was the decline of Cleveland, of racial tensions on the east side, the time of the Hub riots, and later, 2 years later, of course, the Glenville riot.